everybody, I'm Pia from Stitches and Scraps. Today I'm going to show you how to make this bear magnet. You will need Lion Brand DIY yarn, which they provided to me for free for this design, in the colors Camel, Hot Pink, Black, and white. And you'll need a crochet hook, 5 millimeters, or the size that you need to meet the gauge listed in the pattern. Finally, you'll need a strong magnet and a hot glue gun, like Xyron's new mini hot glue gun, which they provided for me to try out for this design. Let's get started making the circle for the back of the bear. I like to start my circles by chaining 2 and working into the second chain. If you prefer a magic loop, you can absolutely do that. So here I have chained 2, and now I'm going to work 6 single crochet into the second chain from the hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I'll join my round with a slip stitch in the first stitch, and then I'll pull on this tail to tighten the center. Okay. Now for the next round, we're going to increase from 6 stitches to 12 stitches, which means we're going to do an increase in every single stitch. The increase that I'm doing is more invisible than single crocheting 2 in the same stitch. We're still going to put 2 stitches into the same stitch, but we're going to start with our first stitch in the back loop only. So I'm doing a single crochet in the back loop only of the first stitch, and then I'm going to put my second stitch into both loops, just like a normal single crochet. And what that does is it hides the increase a little bit, and it makes it so that both stitches aren't going into the exact same hole. So let's do that in every stitch around. First, we single crochet into the back loop only, and then we single crochet into both loops. Back loop only, and both loops. Back loop only, both loops. Back loop only, both loops. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. We have 2 more to do, so back loop only and both loops. Now you may find it helpful to mark the first stitch of the round so that it's easier to find and so that you don't have to count like I just did. I'm going to mark mine with this scrap of yarn in an alternating color. So I just lay the yarn over the work before my join, and then I join into both loops of the first stitch of the round. Now I know where my first stitch of the round is. So now for the next round, I'm going from 12 stitches to 18 stitches, which means I'm going to increase in every alternate stitch. So let's start by chaining 1 and just working a regular single crochet into the first stitch. Now we'll do an increase into the next stitch. Then a regular single crochet into the next stitch, and then an increase into the next stitch. Regular single crochet and increase. And that brings me back to the beginning of the round where I see my marker. So I just flip my marker forward and I go ahead and join into the first stitch. Now one more round for just the circle. We're going to get from 18 stitches to 24. So now we're going to increase in every third stitch. Chain 1, single crochet in the first 2 stitches, okay, and then increase in the next stitch. single crochet in 2 stitches, and increase in the next stitch. Single crochet in 2 stitches, and increase in the next stitch. And we keep doing this all the way around. And that brings us back to the beginning. Now this time we're not going to join, and I actually don't need this marker anymore. So I'm going to take it out. I'm going to pull this stitch up really big so that it doesn't pull out, and you can secure it with a stitch marker, a safety pin, a little knot of yarn, whatever you happen to have handy, just to make sure that the stitch can't come undone while we work on the ears. Now this is a good chance to check the size. As you can see, my piece right now is about 2.5 inches in diameter, roughly, and that's not counting the ears, so that means I'm spot on the gauge. Obviously this is a refrigerator magnet, so size is not that important. If it's a little bit off, it's okay. This is the right side of the back piece, which means it's going to show on the back side of our magnet. Now notice that the back side of the magnet just has the brown side of the ears. The pink side of the ears is on actually the wrong side of this back piece. I know that's confusing, but the wrong side is the part that's inside between the 2 layers. So I'm going to work the pink part of the ear on the wrong side of this piece. So I'm going to flip it over, and now notice the first stitch of the round here where I would have joined if I had joined the round. That's where I'm going to join my pink, but I'm going to do it in the front loop only. So I'm leaving that back loop because I'm going to use that back loop for the brown part of the ear. So I get my pink yarn, and I'm going to join it right here with a slip stitch. And now I'm going to work the whole first ear into this same loop right here, just this front loop of this stitch. And that works as a single crochet, a half double crochet, a double crochet, and then back down again, a half double, a single, and ending with a slip stitch, just like that. So there you have that first ear. And I don't want to carry this yarn. You could carry the yarn across in the middle if that's easier for you, but I prefer not to. I just like having it separate. So I'm not going to carry that yarn. I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to pull that out. And there's the first inner ear. Okay, and that's going to look a lot smaller once we put the outer ear on it, but this is the first inner ear. Now we have the next inner ear that we have to do. For the next inner ear, I'm going to count 6 stitches away and then go into the 7th stitch. So I was in this stitch. Now I'm starting with the stitch that has the loop coming out of it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'm going to start in the 7th stitch. Again, just in that front loop. I'm leaving that back loop exposed for the brown part of the ear. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm joining the pink with a slip stitch, just like that, and then I'm going to single crochet, half double crochet, double crochet, and then back down the ladder, half double crochet, single crochet, and slip stitch. And that finishes the 2 inner parts of the ear. So you can see it used very, very little of the pink yarn. Now we finished our 2 pink ears, and I'm going to work the brown part of the ear. So I'm going to turn my work and put this loop back on my hook. I removed that marker that was holding it in place. Look for the stitch where your pink ear is worked out of. It's the very next stitch that you would have joined into if you had joined the round. So I'm going to go now into the unused loop of that stitch, which is now on the front because we turned, and I'm going to do a slip stitch first to get in there. Okay? Now the ear is almost the same as the pink side, except we're going to start with a chain 1 just to get away from that awkward slip stitch. So chain 1, now we single crochet, half double crochet, double crochet, half double crochet, single crochet, and slip stitch, all in that very same space. Okay, so now we have a brown ear that looks just like the pink ear. Well, now we're going to connect the 2. So turn your work again. So I'll line up all the stitches, and I'm going to start with a chain 1 to get that tail out of the way, or that working yarn out of the way. Line up my stitches so they match, and working through both layers, there should be 5 stitches, not counting those slip stitches. Ignore the slip stitches because they're too tight to work into and they'll disappear when you weave in ends anyway. So go into the first pair of stitches and slip stitch. Now chain 1 and then slip stitch in the next pair of stitches. Make sure you're getting both loops. Okay, chain 1 and go into the next pair of stitches. Number 4 and number 5. And you can see that gives us kind of that decorative edge around all of the stitches there. I'm going to do one more chain, and then I'm going to travel over to this next ear. And to do that, I'm just basically hiding some slip stitches along the inside. So I'm just going to go into each of these stitches and go just in this front loop so that it stays hidden after I seam. And I'm just going to loosely slip stitch all the way over to the other ear. If you counted right, there should be 6 of them. So now I'm at the other ear, and that extra loop, now I'm on the wrong side, right? So that extra loop is actually here in the back of the other ear. So I've got to slip stitch into that extra loop. So now I'm slip stitching into the back loop behind that ear, right? Now I need to turn my work and chain 1 so that I can work the back of the ear, the brown side of the ear, on the right side of the fabric. Now I'm going to do the same thing before, single crochet, half double crochet, double crochet, half double crochet, single crochet, and slip stitch. Okay, this should look very familiar. Now I turn around again. I told you there's a lot of turning in this, right? We're going to chain 1, and then we're going to do that slip stitch, chain 1 joining for both of these layers. So find your stitches, line them up, go through both loops of the stitch, and slip stitch, chain 1 in every stitch. The ears are by far the most complicated part of this pattern, so once you get these down, the rest is smooth sailing. Okay, is there one more? No, that's the slip stitch. Okay, so now I've gone all the way around both of these ears, and I can go ahead and cut my brown yarn because the back piece is finished. All I have to do now is weave in all of these ends. I've woven in all my ends, and I have my magnet and hot glue gun ready to go. I love that it has this kickstand so I can easily set it down on the desk. Now I'm going to push the kickstand back. I'm going to take my magnet and just put a little glue around the edge, not too close to the edge because I don't want it spilling out, you know, and it doesn't take a lot, just about that much glue. And then I'm going to smush that down right in the center of the magnet. It dries really fast, so be careful. And now that's stuck. And now the back of our teddy bear is completely done. Okay, so now we need to make the front. The circle part, the brown circle part of the front works exactly like it did for the back, so I'm going to make that first. So I've got 24 stitches on my last round, just like I did for the back. The only difference here is that I am actually going to go ahead and join, and I'm going to fasten off because there's no other brown attachments on the front piece. So that is my front piece. Now we need to do the muzzle piece. So we take our white, we're done with the brown now. The muzzle starts the same way as the other circles. You can use a magic loop, or you can do 2 chains and work into the second chain, whatever floats your boat on that one. I'm not working something as simple as 6 single crochet though. It's a different shape. I want to create an oval. So I'm going to work 2 single crochet and then a half double crochet, 3 single crochet, another half double, and then one more single crochet before I join. So I've got 3 single crochet on each short side and a half double on each end, so that gives me that oval shape that I'm going for. And then I pull on this tail to tighten it up. Okay. Now for the second round, we're going to do a single in the first stitch. That's that center single crochet. Then we're going to do a single and a half double into the next stitch. We're going to do a half double into the half double, and then a half double and a single into the next single, a single into the center single, and then we start the increases again, so a single and a half double into the next single, a half double into the half double, and a half double and a single into the last single. And that brings us all the way back around to the beginning, and we join with a slip stitch to our first stitch. And that's how you get the muzzle. So we can fasten this off. Now when I fasten this off, I'm going to leave kind of a long tail for sewing. And I should have left a longer tail on this one too. I probably don't have enough, so I'll have to use a separate piece of yarn for that. But I want a long tail that'll go around this at least a couple times so that I have enough to sew it on. Now before I go any further, I'm going to stop and weave in any ends that I am not using for sewing. And in this case, I'm going to end up attaching another piece of brown yarn because I cut this one too short. So I'll do that and then come back and show you the assembly. I've woven in all the extra ends that I don't need for sewing. So I have one long end on the white piece, and I went ahead and attached another long end on the brown piece that I should have left. It's quite long for sewing when I fastened off. So first things first, we're going to attach the muzzle to the face. Now this is the front side, and you can see here the slip stitches where I joined, right? It's a somewhat visible seam there. So I like to attach the muzzle on top of that seam to hide it. You want the bottom edge of the muzzle to be lined up along the bottom edge of these stitches, but you don't want to interfere with these stitches because you're going to need them to seam the whole piece all around at the end. So just above the edges of those stitches, just like that, is where you want to position the muzzle. So you're going to basically do a running stitch hidden underneath. I like to use a back stitch. I feel like it's more secure. A back stitch hidden underneath the ends of these stitches. So first I've got my position. Let me zoom in just a little bit for you. Okay, I've got it in position, and I'm going to go down through that first stitch just because I want to get it there. Now it all looks nice and even, right? So now I'm going to come up through any stitch here except the one I went down through, and I'm going to make a stitch going this way, just under the top edges of these stitches. Do you see that? I'm going just under as if I was crocheting into them. So now I'm going to come back one stitch and go, this is why it's a back stitch, come back one stitch and then go forward one stitch. Okay, so I went down here, this is where I'd come up, so now I'm going to come up one stitch behind there and back down again. One more stitch back here and back down again. Up another stitch and down again. If I do this right, I should end up with a nice oval of overlapping stitches on the back. So come up here. Remember, I don't want to interfere with the edge of the stitch there, so I'm coming up behind that and back down, up, down, all the way around this whole edge to get the whole muzzle sewn on. And stop periodically and check the shape and make sure that you're sewing it where you want it to be, because once it's sewn down, you're not going to be able to move it very easily. So down, up, down, just a couple left to go. And we're back to the beginning. Go down one more. And now the muzzle is securely sewn on the face. Okay, this end, and you can see the oval of stitches that are overlapping in the back here. This end gets woven in and trimmed off. And again, you don't have to be neat because this is going to get hidden when we sandwich everything together. So there's my muzzle. Okay, now I'm going to embroider the face. So get some black thread out, and you really don't need a whole ton of it. This much is probably enough. It's about maybe 24 or 30 inches, something like that. I like to start with the bottom of the mouth here. So I'm going to first weave in a tail of this down here so that it's secure. Okay, now I'm going to bring it up to the center of where I want the mouth. And I like the curve of the mouth being right along the bottom of those stitches there. So I'm going to bring it up right here in the center and at the bottom of that row of stitches. Okay, and then I'm going to take it in one direction, just a little bit, just one stitch over, like that. Then I'm going to come back up in the center. And I'm making my stitches a little bit loose here so that I get a nice full mouth. You don't want it all tight and pinched. And then back down one stitch in the opposite direction. Oh, that's a little lopsided, right? So rip it out. You get to play with this. You get to change it if it's not right. So rip it out and go in a little bit closer till it gets nice and even. Move some of these extraneous threads out of the way. There we go. So I went in there, so maybe I want to go in about here-ish instead. Let's see if that looks a little better. That's a little more even. There we go. So that gives me that little curve at the bottom. Now I'm going to come back up in the middle again for that vertical line, and I'm going to take that line up to where I want the beginning of the nose. So I want the nose probably right around here-ish. So I bring that line down. Okay? Now for the actual nose, I'm going to make one stitch over and over and over, and that stitch is going to go from here to here. And I'm just going to keep making that same stitch until my nose gets nice and full. So it's actually about 4 layers of, I think I used 4 or 5 layers of that one little stitch that just goes around the top here. And then the shaping is done with a little trick right at the end. So I'm making sure to come up in the same spot every time. That's 3. That's 4. And that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to do one more, and this is where I get that little triangle shaping. I'm going to come up in the same spot, but before I go down again in the exact same spot, I'm first going to go under this bar that I made. So that pulls it down a little bit, right? And then I'm going to go back into that same spot. So now I get that little triangle bit at the tip. And there's my nose and the mouth. Now, if I don't like this mouth, I can come back and do another stitch just like this to give it a little more fullness in that spot that was looking a little weak. So there we go. That gives a little more fullness right there. And that's the mouth. Now we have to do the eyes, right? Now the eyes are done similarly to the bottom of the mouth. I'm going to bring it up in the middle, make one stitch this way and one stitch that way. So the middle of the first eye, I want it to be around here, and I'm going to make one stitch horizontally and then come back up in the middle again and make one stitch off to the side like that. The other eye, I do the same thing. I'm going to try and space it equally here. I'm going to come up right about here, make one stitch horizontally, come up in the same spot again, and make one stitch down to the side. That might be too big of a stitch. There we go. And that's the eyes. Now the next part is to sew the two pieces together. I can weave in this black thread along the back, and it doesn't have to be particularly neat because again it's going to get hidden. This last step is the most important one. You're going to put the two layers together and be very careful that the ears are balanced, centered along the muzzle to make it look even. If the eyes are a little off, that's okay, but you want the muzzle and the ears to be centered with one another. The magnet should be in the middle, the pink of the ears should be showing, and now you can use your long tail to sew these together. Now I sewed with a whip stitch that went through both loops of both layers, just like that. So a whip stitch means you go in the same direction every time, and that causes the yarn to whip over the edge and give you that nice little rope-like edge. So I'm going to do that all the way around till I get to the ears. And every so often I'm going to check my position, make sure I'm still okay, match up the stitches and go one stitch at a time. And there, now I've come to the ears. Now for the ears, you can't have this yarn whipping over like that, right? So just for the ears, I'm going to come back down again from the front once here, and then I'm going to do a running stitch or a back stitch. Probably a back stitch. I'm a big fan of the back stitch. So I come up, come down, come up again, and down again. Now a back stitch will leave a little bit of an extra tail there. I don't see it, so I don't think it's an issue, but if you prefer a running stitch, you can definitely do that. And then you're going to come up one last time over here, and then down in the next stitch, and then you can start whip stitching again. And I like to start my whip stitch as close as possible to the ear, so I may go through that stitch one more time, making sure I'm getting both layers and both loops, and then just continue whip stitching around until you get to the next ear. So that last ear I did a back stitch, this one I'll do a running stitch and show you the difference. This is one more whip stitch here. And now with a running stitch, you're just going to come up here and go down in the next one. Okay, and then I should be able to just whip stitch around the rest of the way and be okay. So either way, whatever's easier for you. Back stitch is more secure, but really you're just going over a couple stitches on the ear, so it's not a big deal either way. It's a very secure join the rest of the way. And when I get all the way back around to the beginning, I repeat the first stitch that I made so that I know everything's closed, and then I can carefully weave this tail in the back, trying to get it inside as much as possible so that it's nicely hidden. Whoop. And try not to sew underneath your magnet because you might dislodge the magnet, and you don't want to do that now that it's all sealed up. Now remember, if your magnet is not strong enough to hold through a layer of fabric, which you might want to test before you glue it in, then you may want to glue it to the outside of the back, just so that it holds better. It doesn't, that way it's not hidden, but it'll work better. Okay, so I feel like I've woven this in enough, and I'm going to trim it. And the bear magnet is done. Now on this one, I think my gauge was a little bit looser than that one. You can see they're slightly different in size. Totally okay, right? This is not an exact, it's not something that has to fit. Totally okay if your gauge is slightly different between the two. It'll still be cute. So that's how you make the bear magnet. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, share it with your friends, or leave me a comment. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel for more great videos. Thanks for watching. Bye!